Entonces, les voy a hablar un poquito de quiénes son la doctora Judith y el doctor Bob Wright. Como ya les dije, han sido mis maestros durante los últimos 2 años. Los dos son doctorados en educación. Llevan más de 50 años los dos trabajando en el desarrollo del potencial humano. Y su trabajo tiene una misión, y que cuando lo digo se me salen las lágrimas. Y es hacer un mundo que funcione para todas las personas, una persona a la vez. No sé si lo dije bien, Judith, y si lo está traduciendo, pero yo creo que el sentido está transmitido. Y o sea, el trabajo y la experiencia de estas dos personas, a mí a veces se me olvida con quién estoy, pero ellos han trabajado en desarrollo de currículo en Estados Unidos para personas con discapacidad, han trabajado en desarrollos para temas de salud mental para las empresas, grandes empresas de Estados Unidos, crearon la Fundación Wright para el desarrollo del potencial humano y la Wright Graduate University, donde tuvieron posgrados y maestrías en coaching y liderazgo, un MBA basado en la conciencia del ser, incluso tuvieron un doctorado en neurociencias, liderazgo y coaching. El trabajo que hacen Bob y Judith hoy es un trabajo fundamentado en sus investigaciones en neurociencia y en las investigaciones de otros autores. Son metodologías y procesos probados, no solamente a través de, con apoyo en la neurociencia de investigaciones, sino también a través de la experiencia práctica con todas las personas que han trabajado durante todos estos años y también a través de su propia experiencia personal, de su propia experiencia individual como personas cada uno, pero también como pareja. Algo que vamos a trabajar hoy y que parte del trabajo de Bob y Judith está enfocado a el imperativo de la transformación, que busca que cada persona pueda llegar a ser quien realmente es o que alcance a ser lo máximo que puede ser. Hoy vamos a estar aprendiendo juntos sobre su perspectiva disruptiva con respecto al conflicto y las relaciones y, en últimas, cómo el conflicto puede acercarnos más. Vamos a tener a Bob y Judith en noviembre en Bogotá, en 2 talleres que vamos a hacer abiertos al público. Más adelante estaremos hablando de más detalles y parte de nuestro interés con estos webinars es que nos vamos como relacionando con estos aprendizajes y que cada uno de ustedes revise y mire si considera que este espacio de trabajo con ellos en noviembre le puede ser útil y le puede interesar. Bueno, por ahora yo creo que es suficiente de mi parte. Le voy a dar la palabra a Judith y a Bob. Bienvenidos a este espacio. Gracias por querer trabajar con nosotros en Colombia, por querer aportarnos aquí a Colombia, pero también por su interés en conocernos más y también aprender de nosotros.
Oh, it's beautiful, Anna. Thank you so much. Bob and I are very, very grateful to be here with you.
And I'm very grateful for your kind words. And for those of you who are here joining us, who want to have great relationships and learn how to use conflict to grow closer and to learn and grow personally and to have generally better lives. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Beautiful. Well, some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight are really this whole aspect of what are unconscious contracts? We're going to be discovering that. And how do we explore that to become, have better relationships? How do those block us? And what do we do instead? What do we do differently in order to have really intimate, close, successful, satisfying relationships? And as Bob said, how do we use conflict to be able to grow closer? So we want to get to know you a little bit. Anna introduced us, and we'd like to find out a little bit more about you. So we'd like to give you a poll right now, and really about, like, we all want better relationships, but what relationships in your life do you want to strengthen? You can answer as many as apply to you. You can check as many as that apply. Jay will put this poll up, and you just vote. what are the relationships you'd like to strengthen? Mm.
Sigue aumentando la respuesta, Judith, por eso todavía no te he hecho el análisis.
So can you see what's the one that's most popular, Ana?
Todavía está creciendo la respuesta, pero sigue de lejos. Quiero mejores relaciones familiares. Quiero mejores relaciones familiares con un 69%. Quiero relaciones más poderosas en mi trabajo, un 54%. Yo soy de esas. Quiero mejores relaciones con compañeros de trabajo, colegas, clientes y jefes, 43%. También 43%. Quiero una mejor relación con mi pareja o con quienes tengo más cerca. Yo soy de esas. Quiero una relación amorosa o una relación cercana, 20%. Quiero más amigos y relaciones más cercanas, 26%. Quiero relaciones más fuertes con mis amigos, 34%. Creo
It's
que
interesting. So, well, on everything, we want all of them, right? It's just the biggest one maybe around families, and then oh gosh, it's everywhere. And we need help at work with our relationships.
sí,
I think this gives us the full
sí,
range. Thank you for that. Perfect.
sí.
Great. This is just good to know, like, what are the relationships you'd like to have stronger? Which are the ones that really matter to you the most? Because I think relationships matter to all of us so much. So thank you for that. That helps us. You know, we all want better relationships with their significant others, the people closest to us, with their spouse, with their children, with our families, with their coworkers, with their bosses, with their clients, with their friends. But we are not taught the skills of relating. We don't know what it really takes to really have satisfying relationships, much less how to really navigate conflict or how to have fighting and to resolve that. So this is something that we want to be working on because we weren't taught what we really needed, and we want to change that. So I want to tell you a story about Bob and me, and part of how we were learning about relationships, and we continue to after more than 40 years of marriage. We're still learning and growing. But earlier in our relationship, Bob and I we really loved one another very deeply, and we wanted to be able to understand ourselves and understand each other even better. And we kept having this fight that we couldn't resolve, and we couldn't understand, wait, what are we really fighting for? What's going on? What's going on with me? What's going on with him? So we sought this very famous therapist in Chicago, where we lived, who is just the dean of psychoanalysis in Chicago. He was a real bigwig, a very, very famous guy who was very much known for his insight, because we wanted to get insight as to what was really happening inside here. So what happened is we set up this session with him. It was a long session. It was like a 3 to 4 hour double session, because we wanted to really dig in. And we rushed from work and we got to the session, and Bob and I got into the fight that we were having so that he could help us get insight into what was really happening so we could unlock that. And we're fighting and trying to get it all out. And then it was the halfway point, and we'd been there like 2 hours, and we just rushed from work. So we took a little break, and Bob went to the restroom. We went to the toilet while we had this little break between the sessions. And then while he was gone, the therapist leans forward and he looks at me and he said, "Don't you want a divorce?" I said, "No, I don't. I don't want a divorce. I just want to understand this fight more, like what's going on with me and with him. We love each other very much. With the fight's important. We want to understand it." no, you're fighting. You must want a divorce. And I said, no, no, not at all. He was so uncomfortable with fighting that means he thought fighting was bad. It was wrong. If you're fighting, that must mean it's a terrible relationship. You have to get a divorce. And we realized then that that was not the therapist for us to be seeing, because he was so uncomfortable with our argument, with our fight. And we really just wanted his insight so we could resolve the fight. And that happens a lot with therapists and coaches and ourselves. And, we're not comfortable with fighting, and we don't know how to unlock the fight to see what's really happening underneath. And that's what Bob and I have been understanding and working with. And, Bob, you might say something different about that session. So I maybe should hear from you before I move on.
Judith is being very kind. The truth of the matter is, I can be very difficult. And we needed someone who would manage me and who had deep insight into me. So we actually saw him for quite a long time because his insights into me were very good.
Yeah, that's true. And that did help. And we had to just tell him, look, fighting is fine. Fighting can actually bring us closer, which it did. So, and Bob really is good about wanting to understand what's happening, to take responsibility for when there's issues. So it was actually a good healthy sign for our relationship, not a sign of a problem. So part of this is and I too had been very uncomfortable with fighting and conflict. I had kind of thought the same thing as the therapist in some ways. Oh, if you're fighting or something bad, it's wrong. Anger is bad. I had to really learn the power of being able to unlock a fight and to really be able to understand what's going on and become closer for it. So that's been my journey. It's been very, very important. And part of what we're learning is that relationships, whether it's at work or with our friends or our beloved or families, they're not fragile. Relationships are resilient. They're much stronger than we think they are. And it's really understanding the power of conflict. And that conflict exists. There's no relationship that won't have conflict. And we have to be able to dig into that conflict. And the more we've studied this, and Bob and I have become quite immersed in a whole relationship research. And what we're finding is that, and all the studies show that if you're a couple does not get divorced because they fight. That's not the problem. They split up because they don't understand how to use the conflict to get to a new depth of intimacy, which would never occur without working through those challenges. And the relationship research shows that over and over and over again. So the point isn't to avoid a fight or find some formula to get through a fight or even to win a fight, but is to dig in and get underneath to discover the rich information underneath that argument. And yeah, you get kind of down and dirty and it gets kind of unsettling sometimes, but relationships really benefit when you can explore what's going on beneath the surface of it. So
there's an imbalance in most relationships. Judith began very shy and very quiet. I loved her deeply, yet she needed to learn how to be angry. She needed to learn how to fight. On the weekend, we will discuss the process of her getting stronger, fighting, and the moment when she finally put me on my butt. But that's for the future.
Thanks, Bob. So I think part of what we want to kind of start with here is really understanding that life is conflict, that everyone has conflict. Conflict's the fact of an engaged life. So let's say you're a couple. If you think about if a couple were dancing, as each dance partner does his or own steps, you step on each other's toes. And in order to get really good at a relationship, we're going to step on each other's toes. We're going to bump into each other. So just think about it, like if in my relationship, so Bob wants to see an action flick, a movie with, I don't know, Tom Cruise, an adventure movie. I want to see a romance. I want kind of a sweet story. So, but if I don't mention that, if I don't tell him what my preference is, then that still is conflict, because he has one desire, I have a different desire, and they're not, that's conflict. It doesn't mean that's some big, horrible fight, but it's important that we recognize we have different thoughts, feelings, opinions, and we need to voice those and to get to learn more about one another. And, Bob will tell you, like, just think about some of the typical fights. Bob, you were going to share
one
some.
of the things that I'm very eager to learn about the common couple fights in Colombia, because a common one in the United States is the up and down toilet seat. The women, how many of you women get angry because the men leave the toilet seat up?
I do.
Only a couple. Okay, there we go. So I'll learn about what's common there. But the fights can be about money. Who wants to spend? Who wants to save? Sex first or affection first? Thank you, Stefania, for raising your hand on that one. So at work, people fight over their points of view. They argue over what they should and they should not do. There's this silent resistance. Everybody's got fights going on inside of us. Do I speak about it? Do I not speak about it? Verbal resistance and denial by silence. So there are many ways to fight, and a lot of them are dirty.
Well, and I think, just think about all the ways we get into conflict, just even with friends. It can be simple things. You're going out with friends. They want pizza for dinner and you want Chinese food. Well, that's conflict. It's not the end of the world. It's just to understand that there's tension in relationships. So, oh, Bob, you had some other ways to talk about friends.
One of the common ones is two people break up and all their friends argue. Some of them say it was his fault, it was her fault, and they go back and forth about fault. But what we're going to go is underneath that into the personal responsibility. But they fight about what you should say, what you shouldn't say, what's okay, what's not okay. And it goes into families, where families have rules, myths, and beliefs. You don't say this, you don't say that. You can say this to mom, you can't say that to dad. Who's at fault? Who's to blame? Who's going to have a staycation? I'll learn how you say that in Colombia, staying at home for a vacation, flying to Mexico. Singles, the biggest problem in singles failure when they get married is they didn't start telling the truth. They judged each other silently. They were afraid of things that they didn't say. There's all kinds of conflict inside and out. What do you say? What do you don't say? When a couple gets together, we're going to talk about what happens when they end up marrying down the road. Judith?
Well, yeah. Well, because that tension, those conflicts don't go away. You know what it's like. What the studies show that 100% of couples who are dating lie, because on the date, they're trying to impress each other. They're trying to look good. They don't want to do anything that would upset the other. You want to get them to like you. So you end up lying. And
remember, there are lies of omission and commission. I can say the lie or I can not say it, and I'm still avoiding and obfuscating.
Yeah, you might be avoiding telling the full truth. Yeah.
I want to translate something some people said here, that fighting about values, like valuing different things or giving different value or meaning to different situations.
Well said. That's very, very much. And misunderstanding or not understanding the values of the other. I think that's those are the more, in many ways, those are the more important fights, because you're sorting through
resolving those early.
Yeah. And those are very,
we understand and align or understand the way we raise children. Oh my God. Yes, that's
huge fights. Huge. And that's one of the way we raise children. There's oftentimes a value difference, and your families had different ways of doing things. And then those two cultures come together and you understand these are all the kinds of tensions that occur. And there's so many, and we'll go into more of this, but we'll give some examples tonight.
I think we need to go to the messiness of human interactions.
Well, I think I was going to talk about our first date, Bob, because I think
okay.
Because it's what you were saying, because I did that. When I was dating, I would always act like, I was so interested in the men I was dating, and they would tell me these long, boring stories. And I go, oh, that's so interesting. and smile. And it wasn't interesting. Inside, I'm going, ah, I'm upset, I'm bored. But I would act nice and just listen and try to, be attractive and say what I think they wanted me to say. I wasn't being myself at all. It wasn't just, and then I think about it later as we're learning this. Oh, then starting a relationship with hiding myself. So what? It's not a good way to start, but I was kind of working on this and understanding this. But I want to tell you how Bob and I kind of met and what our first date was like, because I had met Bob. I was actually in another relationship, and Bob and I ended up having a mutual friend, and this friend worked for me. And she would talk about her friend Bob, and I go, yeah, whatever. I didn't care. I was in a relationship. I wasn't interested or whatever. But one day I walked into her office to ask her something, and there's this man in this very nice navy blue suit. He's sitting there she had a fish tank in her office. He's sitting by that. He stood up, shook my hand to meet me. And so, okay, now I understand that's Bob. That's my friend's friend. So fast forward a few little months later, she had a party that I went to as her friend to support her. And Bob was at that party. And I was just, again, I'm in another relationship. I'm not there to meet anyone.
No, hang on. We've got to get this. So in walks this woman with long blonde hair. She has a black, jacket on with a red silk blouse, a cummerbund, and she looks great. And the guys are all over her.
Well, I wasn't so aware of that, but I did have a lot of people that were around me talking to me. So I was enjoying all these conversations with people at the party. Bob ended up coming into and joining this conversation with all these people I was talking to. And then I revealed that I was in this relationship, and
he wasn't talking to them. She was listening to them. And each man barfed all of his stories out and realized that there was nothing happening. So they disappeared one at a time.
Well, yeah,
Finally, I'm last man standing, and I find out she's in a relationship.
And in the minute you found that, you won't even have this a normal human conversation. You just dropped it and you walked away. And I'm like, what a jerk.
I had other things on my mind.
Yeah, well, that's why I thought you were a jerk. And I'm like, we can't even talk to someone, can't even talk to a woman and have a conversation. I just thought he was a jerk. So then months passed, and I'm divorced. I'm out of this relationship. I'm dating again. It's probably another, I don't know how much time passed. And I'm enjoying meeting new men and experimenting and seeing things. And this friend said, hey, Judith, do you want me to set you up with some blind dates with some guys? I said, oh, sure. I'm getting good experience. I'd like to meet lots of different men. And she said, what about Bob? I said, that jerk? Anybody but Bob. I don't want to go out with him. And she said to me, I think you should tell him that. And I'm like, well, okay, but unbeknownst to me, she had gone to Bob, and you have to tell that side of it, that she had talked to you too, Bob.
You mean Barbara Walters, the interviewer, who never says anything but gets everybody else talking? No, thank you.
Yeah, so he said no way to her too. So, but we ended up saying, okay, we would go on this date. So she said to him, you should tell her that. So we went on this first date. All this is backstory for this first date. So we go on this date. At this point, I'm like, okay, I'm going out to this jerk, but it's her friend, and I'll try whatever. But we did tell each other. We told each other exactly what we thought. And we gave our judgments of one another. We said what we liked, what we didn't like, we'd respond to each other in the moment, what we agreed with and what we disagreed with. It was so stimulating. It was like the best date I had ever been on in my life, because it was so real and it was so truthful, and there wasn't any fake about it. And we talked for hours. So our first date started with truth, and it actually started with conflict. I don't like how you were. Well, I don't like how you were. We worked that why and worked that out, and felt so much connection out of that, and so close. And that started this whole pattern for us the rest of our lives. We were to really understanding this is very different to have conflict come up, to say what you really think, to be heard and understood by the other, to work through that tension, to understand each other. And that's been the journey the rest of our time. So that's, so our relationship actually started with conflict. So, and this one had a happy ending.
There was attraction before the conflict.
Yeah, well, of course. But, and we still fight. We fight very, very much, very loudly. And out of that, we start to understand ourselves better and understand each other and come up with greater solutions and more creative solutions to the problems that we're having out of that understanding. So we're learning and we're teaching that. We now know we call them the rules of these kind of interactions that we'll teach you when we come in November to really be able to navigate through what those are. But our bigger point is conflict. We're trying to let you know conflict's okay if we know how to deal with it. And conflict comes up every time we have a different desire, opinion, viewpoint, which, if we're honest, happens all the time, whether it's at work or home or friends or family, and that it's everywhere. And dealing with it productively is what brings us closer. But not dealing with it or dealing with it unproductively puts distance between us and others. It ruins relationships. It keeps us from having the satisfaction we really need. So there's a basic thing I think we need to kind of get to is that, human interactions are messy. Love is messy. This is it just is. But our media, like the fairy tales, they're like sanitized, like in all the stories we hear, ooh, and they met and they lived happily ever after, but true, for a romantic relationship, true love isn't some sanitized version of running in slow motion across a field of wildflowers and then leaping into each other's arms. It's not just murmuring little sweet sayings into one another's ears, nor is it like perfectly synchronized, no sweat sex. Sweat's messy. Sex is messy. All of it's messy. It's the same thing for friend relationships. They're not like the movies where they have that perfectly scripted dialogue and that banter over the dinner table at the restaurant as the friends come together. And work relationships aren't like some finely tuned symphony that perfectly in sync. We're out of tune, we mess up, we miss the beat, we're, whatever, and sometimes we come together. So it's to really understand that true love, true contact, true meaningful relationships, all good relationships require full engagement, like really being present, rolling up our sleeves and digging into the relationships and ourselves, the people we're interacting with, our colleagues, our bosses, our children, our clients, our friends. And it means being more of ourselves to really get to know one another. It's being, saying beautiful things, but also being aware of saying hurtful things. It's sharing our care and our appreciation, as well as sometimes our petty judgments. It's being real and open, but responsible. So this is what we want to kind of awaken to, like, okay, there's always conflict. It's kind of messy to be a human being in relationship. And let's look at how do we get into the mess. We want to look at one of the ways that brings the messiness of human relationships. And it has to do with having these unconscious rules and unconscious contracts, kind of agreements we have in our own unconscious mind. So we'll go into this a little bit, see if you can recognize that. So oftentimes for a couple, if it's a romantic relationship, or it like you divide up the roles. Like for me with Bob, it was like, oh, he's the forthright one. He's the one that can just really say what's so. He can be the one who kind of navigates the tough stuff in life. And then I'll be the listener and the sweeter presence. And he'll provide that. I don't have to be what he is. And I can let him do that for me. And it's kind of an unconscious agreement that we come to. Or sometimes, oh, she'll be the competent one, but he'll be the playful one. You'll see that there's these roles that we fall into that we unconsciously expect from the other that can cause us problems. I think Bob's going to go into this more so we can understand this.
Yeah, so our unconscious contracts get set up unconsciously when we see each other. when we meet each other, when we meet people at work, wherever we go, there are certain contracts that unconsciously are established. And these contracts have rules. For example, in a couple, he's supposed to be the solid one, the dependable one, the quiet one. She's supposed to be the lively one, or she's supposed to be the competent one. And it has to do with roles, but it also has to do with what we say and what we don't say. And these get started with the unconscious rules in our families. What we do, what we don't do. Dad gets to do this. Mom does this. Talk to dad about that. And it's very important that we learn to recognize these unconscious contracts, because if we don't recognize them, we can't learn and grow. And we start thinking there's something wrong. But successful relationships renegotiate these contracts. It's so cool when we start digging into this and you start understanding and you start hearing people's conflict. You realize usually they're having trouble where their unconscious contracts are breaking down and they don't know how to put together a new one. Same thing at work. Cultures at work have to change. One leads, one follows, one challenges. If the follower starts leading, people start having trouble with that.
Yeah, it's like we have these expectations of how people are supposed to be.
That leads us.
That ends up limiting us. So I'm hoping you can track some of this. We're going to go into this a little bit more, because what happens is that we end up kind of unconsciously choosing partners who can provide for us what we don't provide for ourselves. It's driven by unconscious projection. Now, the same thing happens at work. You oftentimes, if you're hiring someone, you're hiring someone that you think is going to save you, the person that's going to make those sales that you're not making, or the person that's going to bring the organization that you need for your company. And maybe they can, but oftentimes we're imagining them to be kind of perfect at something. We're projecting this aspect onto them. And then if they don't perform that way, we get angry, we get upset, and it's a problem. And this is a bigger thing that we can go into more, but to really understand that if we pick people to provide things that we don't provide for ourselves, and it's driven by this unconscious projection, and without being consciously aware, we contract unconsciously with that person to play a certain kind of complementary role in our lives. So I think, Bob, you and I can talk about our dynamics a little bit more, and then we can tell another story about it.
Well, Judith is the sweet one.
Mm-hmm.
And what I used to tell people when early in our marriage or before we got married, what I was so grateful for is that she knew me in total and she accepted me no matter what. That was the original contract. Now, we're going to talk about how things need to change, but I think you should talk about the contract for you originally, sweetie.
Well, I think it's part of that. I didn't allow myself to share my opinions. I didn't allow myself to be angry. I kind of hired you to be the angry one. I hired you to have the opinions. I kind of hired you to have the drive for our relationship. And that I think you kind of hired me unconsciously to be the accepting one, to have the one that had more empathy. But then what happens for us, and it happens for everyone in these situations, over time, the very thing that you hired them for, that you were attracted to in the first place, starts to bother you. You start to resent it. I started to resent your drive. I started to call it like you were pushy. I started to be mad at you about this very thing that I had wanted you to be for me. And that started to, like, wow, I didn't like that anymore.
Before she would say it, I would find her journal open on the kitchen table, talking about how much she hated me.
Yeah, I couldn't say it to you directly, so I'd write it on my journal. I hate you. I'm so mad at you. You're too pushy. And I'd leave my journal on the kitchen table unconsciously, so he'd read it, because I couldn't say it myself. So these are the ways we were trying to work that out. And you liked that I listened in the beginning, but then that really started to bother you. And it's part of why you had that you didn't want to be interviewed by me, but you would chase me around and say, talk to me, talk to me. You know, you didn't want me to just be that passive listener. So that part that you appreciated in the beginning starts to bother you later on. And this, first we're attracted to these things. We want someone to provide that for us, but then we oftentimes resent it, and we need to be aware of that. And I want to go into that a little bit more. Let me tell you another story.
In short, honey, in short, my accepting lovely bride needed to reject me. I needed her to reject me. The contract needed to be renegotiated.
Yeah, needed that. And the same thing, it needed to.
Long story, we'll get into it on the weekend.
Well, because I couldn't just depend on Bob to do these things for me. I needed to become more like him, and he needed to learn to become more like me. Otherwise, we were depending on the other and then resenting that. And there's a learning with this that comes with it. So and I want to just explain the dynamic a little bit more. What the research is finding, and what we found, is that particularly in close relationships, with it could be a couple, a marital relationship, a really good, really best friend. Oftentimes, you pick I say that you pick the perfect prick. You pick the person who's most likely to just prick your unfinished business. It can be in love relationships, it can be work in your social circles. Harville Hendricks did this research on this as well, and he asserts that our unconscious mind is like working overtime to try to choose someone who's a complement to us, somebody that's most likely to activate those unconscious and mistaken beliefs we have about ourselves, or up to someone who will poke at those old emotional wounds that we all carry. And they'll bring to the surface any aspects of ourselves that's not complete, that's not integrated, or that we haven't discovered. And oftentimes that stuff that comes up is painful. It's, stirring. We don't like to see these parts about ourselves. But this is important, because if we want a full engaged life, if we really want to learn and grow and discover about ourselves, be close to ourselves and other people, we need those people who activate those tender parts, so that we can grow from that, so that we can learn and we can even transform ourselves. But without that being activated, we won't, it doesn't come up for us to deal with it. If we were, relationships are one of the biggest places where we get to learn about ourselves. If we just lived in a cave, we wouldn't see these things about ourselves. That's an important aspect for us to be with. So as we're talking, I'm just wondering, can you see any of these kind of unspoken contracts in your own life, or any of these expectations you have that have caused you any problems? And if you have, maybe you can even put something in the chat. It's like, was there something you were attracted to in the beginning with someone, but then it started to really bother you? Did you start to resent it? That's one way you can look at it. I want to know that we're not alone, Bob. And I know we're not. So, yeah, well said. Sense of humor. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. These are good to be aware of. Thank you. It's the very thing, like even in family relationships, the family relationship, you could have someone who always has a sense of humor and is always kind of diffusing the tension by a joke. And in the beginning, you might like that, appreciate somebody who can handle that. But then later you can start judging them, like, you don't take anything seriously. All you're doing is, making jokes about things. So yeah, I see that being too relaxed, or I had to do everything. Yeah, you're seeing what some of these issues are. So this is a little bit hard to talk about or to explain, but I think it's important to really understand that we have these expectations. I'll give you a couple that we worked with, Bob and I. He was, his name was Jay, and he was he was a finance guy, a math guy. He was very logical and secure and solid. And he fell in love with a woman, Fran, who was an artist and had an artistic temperament and was imaginative and alive, and just really was just, much more energetic than he. And they had this natural attraction. Well, he supplied the solidity and security for her, but she supplied the aliveness and the fun for him. And that was very attractive. and they loved each other very much. But when we saw them, they were really fighting and very upset because she was feeling like he's so sour. He's like an anchor. She was feeling like he was dragging her down, this very thing she'd been attracted to in the beginning. And he was seeing her artistic flighty nature as like flighty. She wasn't serious. She wasn't smart. She was like just ungrounded. And it was just bugging him. This very thing that they had enjoyed about each other in the beginning started to really annoy them and was bothersome. They needed to renegotiate the contract because he needed to become more not so heavy, to be more free, to be more alive, to be more creative. She needed to learn to be more solid and more grounded. And as they learned from one another and not had these disparate roles, they started to really bond so much more deeply together again. So what they were doing is they were using what Bob's going to tell us about, this law of complementarity, to renegotiate the contract.
Yeah. So she was the aliveness and he was the solidity. The solidity became an anchor to her, and her aliveness became an irritant to him. They needed to negotiate a transformed contract in which she became more solid and he became more alive. And this is what it really takes, that most couples don't understand. When they think there's a problem, it's an indication that it's time to learn and grow, for each one of us to transform. I needed to work on my own self-acceptance. Judith needed to reject me openly. So that was a very, very important thing for her, because she used to keep so much of her opinions to herself. So this is the common way it works in most couples, the same way at work. One person is enthusiastic, the other one is solid and grounded. One person comes up with all the ideas, the other one says what needs to happen. With friends and family, we find our complement. You know, when you have a circle, you cut the circle in part, the complement is the other part of that circle. We're always seeking the wholeness of finding our complements. And we need to learn to renegotiate these contracts, develop new rules, and that requires learning and growing and finding new ways to be with each other. And one of the biggest problems is couples fight about what they want. Well, I want you to be more accepting again. I want this, I want that. And that's not what causes us to have intimacy. Intimacy is beyond wanting. It's way more than that.
Yeah, and I want to go into that, Bob, because I think that's really important. And, you know, if someone told us this earlier in life, that this is how relationships go and to watch out for these things, and you're going to need to shift this dynamic, you know, that would help. They would forewarn us, and we wouldn't think it meant something terrible when it happens. But we don't have that kind of training. We don't have that schooling. We haven't had that, although we're trying to provide that now. So what we found, and we want to share some of this with you tonight, is like, you know, how do we recognize these patterns? How do we solve that? How do we be able to understand ourselves and understand the people that we're in relationship with more, and to really be able to get a sense of who we are, who the other person is, and how do we connect in different ways? And there's something, and how do we have the skill to really be able to talk about it, to be able to let people know what we really think and what we're feeling. So there's many skills with that, but I'm only going to give you the bigger picture right now of what we've been learning about it in our research. We realized that I studied, and one big part of my research was I studied people who lived really great lives, people who had a good relationship with themselves. They had deep, intimate relationships with their friends, their families. They had good work relationships. They had career success. They became leaders. They were contributing to their world or their community. And I mean, what are they doing to have such a great life all across all those spheres of their life? And if they're doing it, we can figure out what they're doing. Could all of us do that? And that was kind of what triggered my interest in really studying this. I've always been interested in, how do we live the best lives? How do we have the best relationship? But it conducted a grounded theory study to really do the research on what that is. And what I found is, yeah, they are doing something, that there's 6 kind of skills that people that live great lives and have great relationships, that they know, that they do, that they practice. And it's fascinating to see. We ended up calling this process of these skills evolating. It's a Latin word, evolar. It's a Latin word that means flying up and out. It means taking big leaps. It means growing and learning and changing. It means it's different than evolution. Evolate is different than evolution. Evolution is also comes from a Latin word, but that means gradually adapting to things that already exist. Evolution, evolar, is actually doing things that haven't been done before, making bigger leaps, transformational things that are different, that they really help you grow in great leaps. And these 6 skills are applied to relationships. And Bob and I have worked with this so much. It's been so fascinating. And we've also put these 6 skills into a book, The Heart of the Fight, which is coming out very soon in Spanish. We're so excited. And Anna will tell you more about that. We're so excited to be able to get this work. And we're going to be teaching these 6 skills as the workshops that we're going to be doing in Colombia next month and in the beginning of December. We're so excited about it. But let me give you a little hint of something tonight that you can take with you to start working with. So the first skill that we found is that people with really great lives and really good relationships, they orient their lives to not just what they want on the surface, but what do they really yearn for deep inside? What do they long for? What really matters to them? Not what others think they should care about, nor their families or society want for them, but what they really care about very deeply inside. And what they start is really by awakening their moment by moment yearnings. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. Because what we found is under every conflict, every disagreement, every upset, every bad mood, every disharmony are these deeper yearnings. So, and what those are is, if those yearnings are met, we feel, oh, blissful, satisfied. But when they're not met, they feel really bad. It brings a flood of bad feeling neurochemicals through our whole system. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more. We too often fight at the surface. We fight for what we want, but we miss what we yearn for underneath the fight. So the fight never gets resolved and our needs don't get met. So I'll give you an example. And Bob, I think you should tell them the slipper story of one of our fights, or I can, from my perspective.
I'd like to hear it from your perspective, because it was my fight. It was a 4-year fight.
I was a slow learner.
By the way, most people do not know how to carry on a fight over time. This is a want fight that was resolved when yearning came out.
Right. And then we'll go into yearning more after that so you can understand it more. But so we had our place we had our campus in Wisconsin. At that time our main base was in Chicago, and we would come to the campus and it was our university, and we would be teaching. But we had a living space, a home at our university. So we would come up on the weekends, usually, where we would be teaching for the weekend. And Bob would start complaining. He wanted his slippers. You know what slippers are? Like that you wear. I hope that translates. He wanted his slippers by the door when he came in. And he would be mad at me because they weren't there. And said, why do you care? And he was mad at me because I was in charge of the housekeeper that worked here at the campus. And he had wanted me to tell her to have them out for him when he came in the door. And I thought it was stupid. Like, who cares? Just take your shoes off or find your slipper. I didn't understand. And I halfway ask her sometimes. I never made sure that his slippers were there. I just thought it was a dumb request. I didn't know why he was getting mad about it. It was like, and I did not do what it is that he wanted. And he would fight about it, and understanding that he did. And it was only when, so he wanted his slippers by the door, but that's not what he yearned for deep inside. So you want to tell that part about it, Bob, that when we finally got to that, I totally understood.
So I took it as an insult.
Yeah.
That something that simple could not be done, and that our housekeeper wouldn't do it, and our housekeeper worked under Judith's direction. And I didn't say that I felt hurt. I didn't talk about how it symbolically was an insult, and I yearned to matter. And it wasn't until I used the language of yearning instead of what I wanted that Judith went, oh.
Oh, I so understood. It was so symbolic. It was mean, oh, that I care about you, that you matter, that I want to have you want to have things the way that you want them, that I would want to please you so that you knew that you mattered. And I was holding you in my heart and consciousness. And when I understood that, oh, I'm so sorry. Of course I'll help you with that. I just didn't, until I understood that, I didn't unlock that. And I think, Bob, I think you should talk about how it's hard for men to get in touch with.
So we're going to go into this a great deal more, but our yearnings come with our emotions. And as men, we don't have great contact with our fear. We don't have great contact with our hurt. I didn't say it hurt my feelings. We tend to default to anger. We know what we want. We'll say we want sex, but what we really want is affirmation. And we don't know how to get affirmation. We don't know how to get affection. We don't know how. We just don't have the tools for it. 1969, I'm in school in Germany with a Brazilian girlfriend, who's, by the way, is now a professor at Oxford. And she wanted me to have feelings. And she would ask me to close my eyes and want to take me on a journey into my feelings. I would fall asleep immediately, to her great frustration. And this has been a very, very long journey for me and for most men to become much more in touch with our emotions and be able to speak feeling. And just because we use the words doesn't mean that our heart and our deeper experience is really in it. So this yearning is very, very challenging for us as men. We are not accustomed to having as much yearning as women have, as obvious a yearning, and having that yearning showing up as many ways. Women yearn for the kids, they yearn for the house, they yearn for their friends, and they carry huge backlogs of yearning. And even the women aren't that great at it. If you guys were so great, women, you would have taught us a long time ago. So just back
I
up.
think there's some truth to that as well. It really is something for all of us to work together. But I want to teach us a little bit about it now, Bob, so that we can have more vocabulary.
Yeah, we'll go back into men later.
No, I think it's important to be with. So, what we want on the surface, like I may want Bob to pick up his socks, but really I yearn for him to care about me, that I know that my preferences matter to him. But if I keep fighting about the socks or something, then I'm not getting to what really matters deep in my heart. And that's what happens for us. And also, Bob picks up his socks really beautifully. So
yeah. By the way, Judith says she wants something. She doesn't have to ask more than twice. If I want something, I'm generally on a major campaign to get it. I was trained to please women.
Yeah,
she was the third of four, and she was overlooked. She had no bed. She didn't even have a bedroom. And so for her to want something is very, very challenging. So for her to understand my wants is not something she was accustomed to, because her wants meant nothing.
I had to really work on that, and still do. So thank you, Bob. It's really true. I didn't know I had the right to even want things, much less for the things underneath that. And I didn't expect anybody would want to help me with things that mattered to me. These have been lessons for me as well.
And by the way, she's a wonderful woman to please.
Oh, thank you, honey. That was very sweet.
Bobby, Judy, Me gustaría interrumpir un momento hay unas preguntas que tal vez no, de algunas cosas que tal vez no han quedado claras hasta ahora para algunas personas. Y pregunta María Vilán, si puedes volver a explicar qué es evolar, porque en la traducción lo tradujeron como evolución. Entonces, si puedes volver a explicar qué es evolar un poco. Y quiero decir, esto que acaban de mencionar ustedes dos, de cómo yo puedo entender los deseos o necesidades del otro, tanto como puedo comprender las mías. Eso es como, wow, cuando lo oí, o sea, como que, oh, fue como si hubiera sentido como una puñalada aquí en el estómago, en el corazón.
Oh, it's powerful, Anna, what you just said. So thank you for that. And I'll just explain this term that we called evalar, but
So let's talk about this. So Judith, anger was very difficult for Judith. Very, very difficult. And it wasn't a matter of learning a little more angle, little more. On the weekend, we'll talk about the breakthrough when Judith came out with rage. And then she learned to be angry more often. She learned to be angry more effectively. She learned to fight more effectively. So it's a flying up. It is a discontinuous. It's not like this, and then like this. It's like this, boom, like that. And then it levels off and it's like that. There are major changes.
Yeah, like it kind of leaps. You start shifting into a whole nother way of being. It all of a sudden comes together. But the word also means, I don't know if this will translate, also means to unfurl. Like if you have something rolled up like a scroll, and then if it unwinds itself, that the growth can be that way as well. It's like you keep becoming more of yourself. That you keep growing in this way. That it's a becoming kind of word. It's about becoming, unfolding, unfurling. It's like a constant kind of growth that keeps like that. That's so that hopefully that helps a little bit. Does that help, Anna?
Sí, me encanta. María, ¿eso estuvo claro para ti? Porfa, danos feedback. Y hay otra pregunta que me gustaría hacérsela a Bob, que salió hace rato, y Juanita Camacho dice, ¿de dónde Juanita, ¿la quieres hacer tú? Porfa.
¿En español?
En español, porque pues a nosotros nos traducen al inglés.
Claro que sí. La pregunta que tenía que me surgía en la explicación al inicio de cómo estamos siempre pensando que el conflicto es algo que está realmente marcando una pauta que la relación va a fracasar. Es como si el inicio de una relación, ustedes hablaban, al inicio de su relación hubo conflicto y lo empezaron a ver como algo natural. Al menos en la manera como a mí me criaron, me hablan de que si una relación inicia con conflicto, no va a ser exitosa, va a fracasar. Me gustaría entender un poco de dónde viene esa creencia, de dónde viene, si es de cultural o si es familiar. Gracias.
Yeah,
Gracias, Juanita.
Beautiful. Understood. Yes, it's somewhat cultural, but it's also universal because most of the world we're taught that conflict is bad, that it means that there's a problem, that there's something wrong. And what's interesting is that relationship research now, when they're really studying people in relationships,
in all cultures,
all around the world, really finding that belief exists and it's a mistaken belief, and that we're all kind of hypnotized to think that, and we haven't been taught something else. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
One of the first things we have to do on the weekend is cover the myths of relationship. The things that people think makes for a good relationship are almost always wrong. The things your grandmother taught you are wrong. Your grandmother taught you to stay in a relationship and suffer. Other people taught you different things. Most of it is wrong. And because the cultures have different mythology, we have in our mind that things like conflict are a problem rather than an opportunity. So we are reframing relationship.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's interesting. And that is one of the things we've had to find is that we have so many beliefs, and it's not just your grandmothers, it's therapists, it's counselors, it's coaches, it's TV, it's, all these messages we get that are not correct. And what we do is really look, what is the research? What does it really say? And what does our own experience say? So I'm glad you raised that question. Thank you, Juanita. Beautiful. So, all right. Okay, so Ana, looks like
Una
we
pregunta, Ana.
Dale, Rafa, bienvenido.
Hola, gracias. Eh, ¿Existe la posibilidad de que en una relación laboral o personal o familiar ya haya un momento en donde no se pueda renegociar más los contratos inconscientes y haya que hacerse a un lado? ¿Eso está dentro de las posibilidades que ustedes han encontrado en su estudio?
It depends on how far people have gone apart. If they are still willing to talk, I can almost always. I did my first couples therapy session in 1974. And I've worked with thousands of relationships. And if each couple is willing to intelligently discuss how they got together, what their original feelings were, then we can generally find a way for them to renegotiate the relationship. Sometimes that will be in a divorce, but it can still be renegotiated depending on it. The same way at work. If everybody is willing to be responsible, honest, then it's much easier. However, there are skills that need to be had by each person, and we need a skilled person to help the two identify the contracts, to discuss how to change them, and to have individuals understand that they don't change overnight. It is a matter of learning and growing, acquiring new skills, letting go of old skills, and each one of us transforming. So it's not a good answer because your question is very complex and intelligent. I wish I could go into it more.
I think one thing we will do, and we'll teach it in the workshops, that there are 7 rules of interactions, of conflict, of engagement that we teach. And when you use those rules, you're more likely to be able to navigate through these. And yes, you're right. There are times, yes, but it's a good question. Estefania has a question also.
Gracias, Rafa. Dale, Estefanía.
Thank you, Judith. Creo que la formuló en español como todo el mundo. Me gustaría preguntar acerca de algo que hoy en día está en la boca de cualquier pareja, y es la necesidad de llegar a apelativos o a clasificaciones o a etiquetas sobre el comportamiento del uno y el otro. Permanentemente estamos oyendo que el conflicto se basa en que yo determino que el otro o mi pareja es un narcisista, por ejemplo. Y como es un narcisista, por tanto, yo debo huir, porque la razón práctica me lleva a pensar y a determinar que la única posible salida es huir, porque todo narcisista es un... Eso probablemente no lo pudieron traducir. Todos me entendieron. Y yo creo que voy a terminar. Y yo creo que hay
no, very common everywhere. Everywhere in France, Germany, here. So, first of all, if I call you a narcissist, it's generally because my feelings are hurt and I am not expressing myself strongly enough, and I'm afraid of conflicting with you. The number of real narcissists in our world is very, very small, but some people are very self-centered, and our feelings get hurt. around self-centered people, don't they? I want them to see me. I want to matter to them. I yearn to matter to them. I yearn to be affirmed by them. And they are so self-involved, they don't give me anything. So I call them a narcissist instead of saying, I feel hurt around them all the time, which is a responsible statement.
And yeah, we try to stay away from those labels for the very reasons that you're saying. It's really more about what the behavior is and what we yearn for underneath to be able to communicate that. Because once someone's labeled, it makes it very difficult then to negotiate. It's really hard. So I think this is a really good question. And the same, it happens in the United States. It's much of the culture also. It's this labeling, and he's a narcissist, or she's this, or it's hard. I think, Bob, what I'd like to do just in a few moments is to kind of go underneath this to what the yearnings are. And then I know Anna has more to say about where we're going to go from here. But and I think it can help us get underneath this a bit. Let me just give us a little lesson in yearnings, and so that we have something you can be practicing until hopefully we'll see you when we come to Colombia. But I'd like to just go back to that topic of yearnings, of what we don't know how to name or what they are. And I'm going to ask you just to do a little experience with me. If I could have you just kind of take a nice deep breath, all of us. And this is a new skill I want to teach you a bit about. And I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes. And just for a moment, just breathe inside. Just kind of ground yourself a moment. Now you can feel free to open your eyes if you need the translation from my English to your Spanish. And if you understand the English, maybe you can keep your eyes closed. But I want you just to feel these words I'm going to teach you, to experience this. This is a skill that I want you to have the language for. And I'm going to speak to you in the language of yearnings, not our superficial wants, but this universal language of the human heart.
Let's have Anna repeat each one in Spanish after you say it in English, honey.
Okay, so then they can speak.
Then they can all close their eyes.
Okay. If you would, Anna, that's great. So let's go all close our eyes. And I'll just say, I'm going to just speak to you in this language of yearning. I want you to sense how you feel. Which of these do you relate to? What can you resonate with these yearnings? Some of them they'll probably all touch you, but some will matter more to you than others. I yearn to love and be loved. Can you say that one, Anna, in Spanish?
Okay, come off mute.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yo anhelo ser amar y ser amada.
I yearn to be seen, to be heard, to be known.
Anhelo ser vista, ser escuchada, ser conocida.
I yearn to be safe and secure.
Anhelo estar segura y a salvo.
I yearn to touch and be touched.
Anhelo tocar y ser tocada.
I yearn to be valued, to be affirmed.
Anhelo ser valorado, ser afirmado.
I yearn to express myself.
Anhelo poder expresarme a mí mismo.
I yearn to belong and to connect deeply with others.
Anhelo pertenecer y conectarme profundamente con otros.
I yearn to matter.
Anhelo importar.
I yearn to make a difference.
Anhelo hacer la diferencia.
Just see which of these comes up for you. Is it to love and be loved? To matter? To make a difference? What strikes you?
Anna, translate. Some people still have their eyes closed.
Ok, ya podemos abrir los ojos y vamos a escribir, quien quiera escribir en el chat de esos anhelos que escuchó cada persona, ¿cuál le resuena más? ¿Cuál lo toca más?
Take a nice deep breath. All right, now open your eyes. Can you say in Spanish, Ana, open your eyes?
Sí. Respira, una respiración profunda. Abrimos los ojos.
Okay. Just feel how this feels. Chances are you feel calmer, more grounded. Okay. Our deeper yearnings activate a pleasure center of our brains that has the neurochemicals of like opioids and things that help us feel like bliss and calm, connected to ourselves. And the more we can understand those deeper yearnings and the more we can express what it is we really yearn for, and the more we can notice those and engage in our life in a way to meet those, the more satisfied we are, the more connected we are with others, the better our relationships. And remember, anytime that we're not calm, anytime that we are upset or in a fight, is because our yearnings haven't been met. And if we know what they are, we can take more responsibility to meet them. This is a really profound skill. It takes some practice and some work, but it really helps to unlock a depth of satisfaction and a way to really deeply connect with other people. Because when we speak to each other more in the language of yearnings, we instantly understand one another. We instantly feel more connected to one another. We feel closer. And there's more to this skill, but I'd like to want to just have you have these words in your mind as you go about your days, and to think about even tonight, what do you yearn for? Do you yearn to be connected? Then maybe you call a friend. Do you yearn to touch and be touched? Then you go hug your honey or your dog or your stuffed animal. If you yearn to be heard, then speak up. So to really help you guide you with what those are, and for us to, and we'll teach you more about how to really orient towards your yearnings in relationship to get them met. It's very beautiful and they're very profound. And I hope you can get a little hint of by learning that little language of yearning. And I think, Anna, so I want to turn this over to you, Anna. I just want to say that you've provided an opportunity for me to meet my yearnings tonight, and with Bob to be able to connect, to hopefully matter, to make a difference, and what we've been sharing, hopefully to be understood, and we're affirmed and valued just by having this experience together. It's met very many of my yearnings, and it's very, very satisfying. And I appreciate you, Anna, for providing this opportunity for us to relate. But I want to turn it to you now so we can go to our next ways of how we can continue to play together.
Okay. Gracias, Judith, y gracias, Bob, por este rato tan bonito. Gracias por su generosidad, por su presencia auténtica y transparente. Antes de pasar a contarles, quiero saber si hay alguna otra pregunta. Si alguien quiere hacer alguna otra pregunta.
Gabriela tiene la mano levantada. Bueno,
Gabriela, gracias, Julio. Gabriela, ¿algo que quieras? Perdón, les voy a pedir que abran el micrófono y hagan sus preguntas espontáneamente porque a veces no es tan fácil ver todo al mismo tiempo. Gabriela, bienvenida. Tu
Hola,
pregunta.
muchas gracias. Me gusta todo lo que estoy escuchando y conecto mucho con estas ideas de que hay maneras de entendernos, solo que no llegamos a ese punto medio donde generamos comprensión y compasión hacia el otro. Esos conceptos me parecen fáciles de desarrollar o más sencillos si las dos personas están hablando el mismo idioma o están recorriendo el mismo camino. ¿Qué pasa cuando tienes a una persona con mucha conciencia y otra que está muy cerrada? A esta persona le toca hacer el trabajo sola, tratar de penetrar para cambiar, o le toca cambiar de camino para seguir. Porque
Yeah,
también todo tiene un límite, ¿no?
it's a
¿Cuál
very,
sería el plan de acción?
So we'll tell the story on the weekend of a woman whose husband never learned this language, but she changed and she knew her deeper yearnings. She changed around him. They were almost 40 years in marriage, and she began having the most loving time with him that they had ever had. They'd raised 2 adult children. And thank God, 5 years later, he died. But they died as close as you could imagine. And he never learned any of it. She did it all.
Well, and I think it's really been beautiful to see that, because these 7 rules of interaction, these 7 rules of engagement we'll teach on the weekends, even if the other person isn't at the same level, even if the other person isn't doing it, using those rules oftentimes makes a very big difference in the relationship. So that, which is what she did, and it made a big difference. It doesn't always work out, I understand, but it gives you a chance to have, even if the other person isn't playing with you, it isn't at your level of consciousness.
So her change got started when she said to Judith in a seminar, she wanted to be adored the way Bob adored Judith. Judith said to her, well, I'd suggest you become adorable. She
wasn't someone that was easy to adore. She had to work on that, and she did, and it made a difference. So we can learn more about that. But it's a common question that you're asking, and a good one. So I appreciate you saying it. Thank you.
Gracias, Gabriela, por tu pregunta. Buenísima. Y creo que en los talleres de fin de semana, y eso nos da pie para empezar a conversar un poco sobre esto, vamos a profundizar muchísimo en eso, porque en esa pregunta que tú haces hay una clave grandísima y hay mucho más por profundizar y como por indagar ahí. Bueno, Jay, gracias por compartir. Entonces, quiero contarles que vamos a tener Bob y Judith llegan a Colombia el 26 de noviembre. Vamos a tener varias actividades con ellos de diferentes tipos, pero tal vez las actividades como más masivas que vamos a tener o más masivas no, porque no van a ser masivas, sino más abiertas. Vamos a tener 2 talleres abiertos al público. El primero va a ser del 29 de noviembre en la tarde, que es un viernes. Empezamos en la tarde, que es en la tarde del viernes, hasta el 1 de diciembre, más o menos al mediodía. Esto lo vamos a hacer en el Hotel El Portón, aquí en Bogotá. Es un hotel que queda después les mandaremos las indicaciones específicas en la 84, como con 7ª A, abajito de la 7ª. Es un hotel que por fuera no se ve muy grande, pero por dentro es muy bonito. Ese va a ser nuestro primer taller. El siguiente taller va a ser del jueves 5 de diciembre en la tarde al sábado 7 de diciembre después del almuerzo. Queríamos inicialmente hacerlo de viernes 6 a domingo 8, pero pues la celebración, yo pensé que de pronto sería un espacio lindo para aprovechar la celebración de las velitas, pero sabemos que es un evento muy familiar en Colombia, entonces por eso va a ser de jueves en la tarde a sábado al mediodía o después del almuerzo, para que las personas puedan salir y tener su celebración. Esto va a ser en Subachoque, en un sitio de eventos que se llama Casa de Paz, Amar, que la dueña de este sitio tiene un propósito profundo de traer crecimiento y fortalecer la espiritualidad. Ella está hoy aquí con nosotros, María Consuelo Escarpeta. Ella nos vamos a hacer el taller. Ahí, ese taller de Subachoque, en el precio está incluido las 2 noches de alojamiento, que son la noche del 5 y la noche del 6. En el Hotel El Portón no vamos a necesitar alojamiento, a no ser que las personas vengan a Bogotá y busquen su alojamiento, pero en el precio no va a estar incluido ese alojamiento. En el chat, Jay, ¿habrá algo más que me quieras? ¿Tenemos otra diapositiva? Me gustaría que me la volvieras a poner para que las personas puedan como ver. Gracias, Jay. Ok, entonces, si quieren tomar esta foto, entonces repito, son 3 talleres de más o menos 3 días, 2 días y medio, donde vamos a estar un grupo de personas. Este taller está dirigido a líderes que quieran aprender de las relaciones en su vida en general, en el trabajo, con sus amigos, con sus familias, con sus parejas, con sus hijos, a personas que quieran trabajar y aprender de sí mismas a través de trabajar en sus relaciones, también para terapeutas, para coaches. Entonces es un espectro grande, y también para parejas, o sea, parejas que quieran ir y trabajar en su relación. En estos talleres, pues están más que bienvenidas. Entonces, incluso vamos a tener un precio especial para personas que vayan en pareja. Pero eso no quiere decir que yo voy con mi amiga y no, si yo voy con mi pareja, con mi novio, con mi marido, yo voy con mi pareja, tiene un precio especial, y si voy sola o solo, tiene otro precio. Entonces, bueno, ¿hay algo que me falte decir? Judith, Bob.
I think
I
you're
want to thank everybody. I am so eager to learn from and with all of you. Thank you so much for having the yearning to ask those questions and participate tonight.
We're
That's
so
courage.
Oh, sorry, Bob, I talked on top of you. See, I've learned how to talk. So, but Anna, it's so beautiful what you're saying about the workshops. There's so much that we want to share. And I think you're letting people know the logistics about them and the invitation. And there's so much we can learn together and grow together. So I think you did a beautiful job describing. And there are, when they go to the website, go to the link in the chat, there's descriptions of the different topics we're going to cover, and it's very rich and should be very, very satisfying and growthful for all of us.
Gracias, Judith. Antes de que se vayan, quiero decir que vamos en el chat, tenemos los links donde ustedes pueden tener más información, más detalle del programa que vamos a tener en esos 2 fines de semana. Por aquí Alina pregunta, los 2 talleres son 2 talleres que pues por lo pronto van a ser más o menos iguales dependiendo de la audiencia, pero pues no es necesariamente ir hay que ir a los 2, podemos ir al uno el primer fin de semana o al otro. Van a ser en sitios distintos y eso va a dar un tono diferente, o sea, uno en Bogotá, donde estamos, y cada uno se va para su casa al final del día, y otro en Subachoque, y el de Subachoque va a tener pues un componente mucho más intensivo porque vamos a estar todos juntos ahí. Bob, ¿quieres decir algo?
For coaches and therapists who would like to be certified in Heart of the Fight couples coaching, you may want to consider both weekends. Anna and I will be putting out some of the early certification process for people.
Perfecto, sí, ese es otro, bueno, por aquí dice Marcela que ya está inscrita con Alan, su esposo. Lo que dice Bob es bien importante y es, estamos construyendo oferta para tener una continuidad en este proceso de aprendizaje y que no sea simplemente un taller puntual. Nuestra intención es tener un proceso de certificación, como Bob lo dijo, y que Judith y Bob puedan acompañarnos durante un periodo de tiempo y posiblemente que puedan volver a Colombia en febrero del otro año. Entonces, antes de irnos, quiero decir, tenemos en el link, tenemos en el link, perdón, en el chat un link y ahí van a encontrar la oferta. Las personas que se inscriban hoy van a tener un beneficio adicional. Entonces, por un lado, tenemos desde hoy como hasta el 30 de octubre un descuento del 20% para quienes se inscriban de hoy hasta el 30 de octubre. Y tenemos para las personas que se inscriban hoy un beneficio adicional, y es que vamos a tener unos talleres grupales más pequeños con Bob y Judith. Uno es el 13 de noviembre, creo, y el otro, no, uno es el 30 de octubre y otro el 13 de noviembre. O sea que tendremos las personas que se inscriban hoy, o digamos que se inscriban entre hoy y mañana, van a tener ese beneficio de esos 2 talleres adicionales virtuales. Alejandro, ¿quieres hacer tu pregunta? Alejandro alzó la mano, pero... Ok. Jay, ¿me puedes hacer el favor de mostrar la última diapositiva donde aparece mi teléfono y mi correo para que le tomen foto a algunas personas? La última diapositiva de la presentación.
Another one that has Anna's phone number on it, Jay. There's another slide.
Esa, al final.
Yeah.
Esa,
There we go.
gracias. Jen. Entonces quiero pedirles que le tomen foto. Las personas que estamos gestionando esto somos Carolina Quiñones y yo. Aquí están nuestros teléfonos y nuestros correos. Carolina está de viaje, llega a final de este mes, entonces por lo pronto pues estaré yo totalmente dispuesta a recibir sus preguntas, sus inquietudes, sus sugerencias. Pues queremos realmente aprovechar este espacio. Me dice María Fernanda que repita. Entonces, talleres virtuales serán el 30 de octubre y el 13 de noviembre. Son talleres de 1 hora, 1 hora y media máximo, donde estaremos con Bob y Judith haciendo un trabajo adicional. Los talleres presenciales van a ser el primero en Bogotá del 29 de noviembre al 1 de diciembre y el segundo en Subachoque el 5 de diciembre, que es jueves en la tarde, hasta el sábado 7 de diciembre al mediodía. Muy bien. Creo que podemos ir cerrando, ya nos pasamos unos minuticos. Quiero dar gracias profundamente a todos por su tiempo, por su interés, por querer estar acá. Bienvenidos a este viaje, a este trabajo con nosotros. Estaremos atentos a sus registros, sus inscripciones, sus necesidades de información y apoyo. Cuenten con nosotros. También quiero agradecer a Bob y Judith por este tiempo y por su generosidad. También agradecer al equipo, Karin, que ha trabajado fuertemente para crear este espacio, Jay, que nos ha acompañado en su apoyo logístico en varios temas, otras personas del equipo que no están aquí hoy, Ben, Elizabeth, Bradley, Damilola. Bueno, tenemos un equipo global maravilloso. Gracias a todos y bueno, que tengan buena noche y aquí estaremos. Hasta luego.
Hold it just a second. No. Thank you for staying over.
Sí.
I really appreciate that. But we are here through an act of extreme love and dedication. Anna has spent untold hours making sure the translation of the book is fantastic for you. She has spent, I cannot tell you how much time, how much love pulling us together here. So if we could all just give her the greatest applause and thank you. I don't know how to do it, but we are here through the love of Anna.
Gracias, Bob.
Gracias.